Hello, everyone. I'm honored to welcome and introduce you to Mary Scott and Divya Sharma as our speakers for today's Policy Matters session. Mary Scott, following her professional work with Employment and Immigration Canada and later Human Resource Development Canada, Mary worked extensively in the community. In 1995, she attended the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing, China as an observer for the Canadian Federation of University Women and has continued to actively work towards women's equality at home and internationally. She has attended many meetings of the Commission on the Status of Women at the UN. Mary has served as president of the National Council of Women of Canada. She has supported the voice of our Indigenous sister being recognized and heard. Mary received countless achievements and awards. Let me share a few. Mary received the Woman of Distinction Award in 1998. She received the Canada 150 Medal honoring Manitoban changemakers in December 2017 and received the Manitoba 150 Trailblazer Award, officially announced January 2021. Earlier this summer, Mary was honored with the Lifetime Achievement Award by the Council of Women of Winnipeg and the Provincial Council of Women of Manitoba. Now we have our second guest speaker, Divya Sharma. Divya is a leader and advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Her professional and volunteer work for a wide range of causes has spread across Canada and beyond. At the age of 20, Divya Sharma is experienced with community engagement, the public and nonprofit sector, government, and student politics, and has been recognized locally, nationally, and internationally. Sharma is the youngest board member of several organizations. As the president of the University of Manitoba Students' Union, Divya advocates for policies and campaigns that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion and support 30,000 students. Director of Communication for the Community of Big Hearts, a social enterprise dedicated to Indigenous reconciliation. Due to her dedication to diversity, equity, and inclusion, she was selected to serve as a youth delegate for the United Nations 68th Commission on the Status of Women and a UNICEF U Report ambassador. Divya carries the spirit of Seva after moving to Canada at the age of 9 and takes pride in continuing to volunteer. Now I will pass it on to my colleague Sakshi to moderate the Q&A session. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you to my colleague for introducing our two speakers today, which is Mary and Divya. I want to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to today's session on policy matters, where we will focus on the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action and its continued relevance in today's world. We are very honored to have both Divya and Mary here with us today, and I will be moderating the Q&A session. Before we get started, just a quick introduction of myself. My name is Sakshi Bhargav. I am currently a political science final year student at Western University, and I'm also a member of the Youth Policy Hub here at OCIC, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be on a platform such as this. Throughout the session, we do encourage you guys to ask questions at any time and use the chat. We also have moments where you can unmute yourself and ask questions directly. So yeah, let's dive right in. Our first question for today's session goes to both Mary and Divya. Could you briefly introduce the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action and how it has evolved over the years? We will start with Mary and then pass it on to Divya.
Well, thank you so much, Sakshi, and just really appreciating this opportunity and recognizing the work and contribution that you've all made to make it possible. and coming together. It's important, and I really congratulate you all. I did want to start off by acknowledging that my home is in Treaty 1 territory, the original territory of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Oji-Cree, the Dakota, and the Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. So I personally have pledged to listen and learn from the Indigenous peoples who were first to live on this land, and to support particularly my Indigenous sisters and Two-Spirit as an ally and as a friend. So I wanted to start with that. But I also think it's important for all of us to kind of appreciate the history. That was a great introduction to have those questions, really putting myself in the, answering them. And fortunately, I got them all right. So that was good. But I just want you all to, you probably weren't even, many of you weren't even born in 1995. So it goes back, some time and before, and that's what I wanted to talk about a little bit about before, because it's an interesting history, and I think it's important to understand this evolution. Since the Beijing conference in '95, the implementation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action have been assessed by the UN Commission on the Status of Women each year, and a thorough review process carried out every 5 years, which is what we're looking at now, reaffirming every UN member's commitment to the full implementation, all 193 member states. I wanted to give you just a bit of background about the CSW, the Commission on the Status of Women. It first met at Lake Success, New York, in February 1947. February 1947, soon after the founding of the UN, which was in October 1945. So all 15 government representatives at that time that came together were women. And from its inception, from the very birth of CSW, the Commission was supported by the UN. And the Commission forged a close relationship with non-government organizations, OCIC, and they made a point of having that relationship with NGOs, and especially those in consultative status with ECOSOC. And they were invited to participate as observers. So this commission's focus from 47 to 62 was setting standards and formulating international conventions to change discriminatory legislation and foster global awareness of issues affecting women. And contributing to the drafting of the UN Declaration on Human Rights, CSW successfully, even back then, successfully argued against references to men, for example, as a synonym for humanity. The Commission was also successful in introducing a much more inclusive language. Since the codification of legal rights of women needed to be supported by data, and this is so important today, by data and analysis, the Commission embarked on a global assessment of the status of women. Extensive research produced a detailed country-by-country picture of their political and legal standing, which over time became a basis for drafting human rights instruments. The Commission drafted early international conventions, such as the 1953 Convention on the Political Rights of Women, and in 57, the Convention on the Nationality of Married Women, and in 62, the Convention on Consent to Marriage, minimum age for marriage, registration of marriages. And of course, in 63, there was the major request to the Commission to draft a declaration on the elimination of discrimination against women, which the General Assembly ultimately adopted in 1967. There is so much history here before 95. And there were 3 world conferences. I think most of you got that right, that Beijing was the 4th. But there were 3 world conferences before Beijing, one in Mexico City, one in Copenhagen, and one in Nairobi. The Commission on the Status of Women served as the preparatory body, like they were the ones, as they do today, organize the Beijing conference. there were 20 of us, maybe even a few more than that, from Manitoba, who attended that conference. And as you're doing, we took time. We started maybe a year, 18 months before the Beijing conference, and we met every week, sometimes by phone. But we met and studied the different documents that were starting to come out. And one was called the Agreed Conclusions, which became the platform for action. And I think most of you have probably, I don't know if you can see this or not, but it's the book. And I think most of you, oh, there, I think it's, no. Anyway, so that's that's what we kind of did here. It gave us an opportunity to learn so much, to be made aware in a meaningful way of the violence against women in all parts of the world. See the world through women's eyes was a theme, and it remains so today. It was an amazing experience to be in Beijing and Huairou. Huairou was where the NGO, it's outside of Beijing, the site of the NGO conference. There were 50,000 NGO and government participants. The NGO Forum on Women began days before the official conference, and for 10 days, participants chose, get this, 4,000 workshops and panels to attend. They joined in the daily plenaries that highlighted speeches from feminist activists and leaders. I was inspired by Hillary Clinton's human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights. Plenary speakers rallied the crowds around global themes such as political participation, religious freedom, economic justice, and violence against women. There were tents. That's the way that it was, organized. There were tents for women to meet each other according to the world's regions, and they were the centers of networking and lobbying preparations. I'll never forget Jewish and Palestinian women coming together and joining. The Women in Black movement was a very strong, motivating action that happened. It was wonderful to see that women coming together in the peace tent, where maybe there were differences, but they would sit in this tent and have a discussion, maybe using translation, but getting together to talk about really serious issues back home. After the conference, the Commission was mandated by the General Assembly of the UN to play a central role in monitoring the implementation of the Beijing Declaration and the Platform for Action, and advising ECOSOC accordingly, with UN Women, which you're familiar with as the Secretariat of the CSW, and in that role performs its substantive and administrative work. Which brings us to today, and how you can participate and join in the upcoming meetings of the 69th session of the Commission on the Status of Women and the 20-year review of the Beijing Platform for Action and the Beijing Declaration. So that's just a little bit of background. I hope that kind of puts it into perspective and gives you a sense you're part of this history.
Yeah, it definitely did. I think I speak on behalf of all of us to just say thank you for setting the foundation and making us understand obviously the background of the Platform for Action. I will just pass it on to Divya as well, just for her to answer the same question, just so we can get also her perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sakshi. And before I start, I do also want to recognize I have the privilege of being from the same land that Mary's from, so Treaty 1 territory, and she did a beautiful treaty acknowledgement. And I, of course, do my work on the University of Manitoba, which is also located on Treaty 1 territory, and I received my education on these lands. And I immigrated to Canada when I was 9, and I've really been able to grow as an individual on these lands, so I really honor that. With that being said, I don't think I could have worded some of the information that Mary gave any better. What I would like to share is what sort of there for the future, what can we influence and what can young people sort of contribute. And I think over the last couple of years, and Mary, feel free to add more to this, but I do think there's been a strong representation from younger people in the recent few years, especially in respect to CSW and the Beijing Declaration itself. So here are some things that I believe are critical and important to the declaration itself and in sort of women's rights as a whole. When we think about the key focus areas of BPfA, it's I believe, in my opinion, the idea of enhanced implementation and accountability. So things like bridging that gap between the gender gap. So despite multiple different progresses, gaps remain in areas such as economic improvement, political participation, and addressing gender-based violence. We recently saw there was a federal announcement to really make sure that resources are being put towards gender-based violence. So not only do we need to look at that as a Canadian issue, but globally. And the next phase focuses on a stronger implementation of these existing commitments with more accountability from governments and stakeholders internationally. And when we think about, how do we get there, it really comes down to data and monitoring. So improving data collection, monitoring mechanisms to track progress. 12, and there are 12 critical areas and issues that the BPfA concerns itself with. And this includes gender disintegrated data to create more targeted policies. Oftentimes when we look at some of the UN events and how they contribute to policy, there's a set amount of people that are brought to the table. And when we look at us as NGOs and civil society organizations, I think it's important that we really contribute to these discussions in a meaningful way that really implement or help implement and influence policy. So I think that's where a lot of that work really lies, because at the end of the day, it really comes down to how certain words are written on that paper and how then they're going to be implemented and translated into action. So that's the critical piece. And then, of course, it's really about how do we address these emerging challenges? So, what are these challenges when we think about climate change issues, environmental issues, things like digital transformation? I mean, over this last year, when I went to CSW, which I'll be talking a little bit about today, is the idea of digital transformation and how in develop countries across the world, the global south, and how digital transformation is such a critical aspect in their own journey, and what we can do to support women and girls through the forums that we attend, whether that's CSW or the Beijing Declaration. And then another one is post-pandemic recovery. I think that's a really critical issue where young people are faced a lot with mental health challenges, and specifically women who've I'm a global political economy major here at the U of M, and one of the things that we talk about a lot in my own learning is how women do a lot of the labor at home that isn't really recognized. So recognizing that as a part of the post-pandemic recovery and how a lot of women had to take that childcare sector and run with it during that pandemic time, and how we're looking towards that recovery. So once again, looking at that on an international scale, and then the idea of intersectionality at the end of the day. So what are the different ways that intersectionality contributes to our own identities, and then the unique challenges that are faced by marginalized groups, including women, the different races, ethnicities, disabilities, sexual orientations, and socioeconomic statuses. um with that, I also just want to recognize that Canada was one of the, if not the only country, one of the only countries that talked about the idea of Indigenous women and reconciliation on the CSW platform last year. And I think that the Beijing Declaration would be such an appropriate spot to move that conversation forward. So that, once again, that's engagement and leadership. I think I'd said this earlier. I believe there has been a significant improvement in youth engagement and leadership. I mean, I wasn't alive in the 1990s, but I certainly know for a fact that sometimes young people weren't invited to be at those tables. And I think there has once again been that improvement. And now that we have the ability to sit on these tables where we're asking for space, I think it's important to recognize that and not take it for granted, and advocate for other younger folks and other younger women especially, and really empower them to be at these tables, and include allies such as, once again, men, boys. It's not just about women contributing to this conversation, it's about the entirety of society, including gender diverse folks, and men and boys especially, who once again have a role in our society, and really empowering women, and contributing to that gender equality side of things. So that's my take on what Mary had shared.
Yeah, that was actually very insightful to hear everything from your perspective as well. So thank you both for setting the foundation. I believe it's very important to discuss the evolution of the Beijing Declaration because it's a very critical context for the rest of our discussion. So on that note, we will move on to the next question. And our next question is, in the light of many conventions that have evolved over the years, how do the BPfA and its critical areas stay relevant in today's time, especially alongside conventions like CEDAW? Mary, could you please start us off on this one, and then we will hear from Divya.
Okay, thanks, Sakshi. I just wanted to really congratulate Divya. You know, the details of moving forward and what that means in many aspects of society and many facets of society. It really makes you think the work that lies ahead, the challenges that lie ahead. But yeah, this is an interesting question, and I guess the fact that the Beijing Platform for Action and the Beijing Declaration is relevant today, and we are witnessing such an important time to raise our voices, remind countries that these documents were agreed to, and are as important today as they were 30 years ago. They are relevant. I wanted to speak here about the current global context a bit, particularly at the UN. First, where are the women? Did you know that of the 133 heads of state or government, presidents, prime ministers, scheduled to speak at the UN General Assembly, 79th, the one that's happening now, at the high-level debate, only 9 are women. That's a mere 6.8% of the total world leaders scheduled to speak. This percentage is a big drop, even from the last few years at the Assembly's opening session, when it averaged around 12. The platform for action is relevant here. We must recognize how important it is to have women in all their diversity represented at decision-making tables. Peace negotiations, war in Gaza, in the Middle East, Afghanistan, Sudan, you name it. Are there any women in the peace negotiations? There is a whole section E on the Platform for Action, Women in Armed Conflict, that gives an excellent argument of war and armed conflict disproportionately affecting women and girls, and why they must be present in peace negotiations. Sustainable Development Goals. I don't think I need to say much here. You all know there are the 17 goals, and number 5 is gender equality, and that it is actually a big part of the other 17. And big question related to the SDGs is, how do we pay for them? This is coming up time and time again. To achieve the prosperity, social inclusion, and environmental protection, nations and regions require well-designed, well-implemented, and properly governed and financed programs of public and private investment. Poor countries with a majority of poor women urgently need to gain access to affordable long-term capital so that they can invest at a scale to achieve these sustainable development objectives. Coming up soon, like this weekend, the Summit of the Future, Multilateral Solutions for a Better Tomorrow. It's September 22nd and 23rd. And tomorrow, the United Nations General Assembly decided the future, the Summit of the Future has an important role to play in reaffirming the Charter of the United Nations, reinvigorating multilateralism, boosting implementation of existing commitments like the Beijing Declaration, and agreeing on concrete solutions to set these challenges and restoring trust among member states. So that conversation is so important. What are they saying? How are they saying it? Who is saying it? What country is it? There are action days preceding the summit, starting on the 20th, yes, this Friday, bringing together representatives from member states, civil society, private sector, academia, local and regional authorities, youth, and many more. The action days will provide an opportunity for broad engagement and inclusion. These stakeholders have all played a key role in shaping the pact for the future and will be critical to its implementation. I note the pact is kind of what they call the agreed conclusions, like this book that they had that was the agreed conclusions from the Beijing conference. And this pact, they have now gone through, I think, three reiterations, three copies or three attempts at coming up with a document that the countries will agree to, but there are objections still. The pact has not been agreed to by all countries. So you can imagine, how the NGOs can make, when you're at the CSW or when you have an opportunity to hear what the debate is, there may be something like women in all their diversity that should be language that is included. But some countries don't agree to that. They don't agree to having, I remember when we wanted women and girls, they didn't want girls in there. So, the NGO can go to their country and say, yes, Canada, you've got to support this and talk about it with those that are doing it. NGOs don't do the actual negotiation, but they can put pressure on their country or other countries, other caucuses coming together. So it's really important that the youth are getting together and maybe agreeing on some things and what countries are objecting to certain languages and going to those countries and saying, listen, the youth of the world are wanting to see this language improved or stronger. So I just wanted to kind of motivate how important it is that language can be. The action days will provide that opportunity for broad engagement and inclusion. These stakeholders have all played a role in shaping the pact. They've already been involved in shaping the pact for the future and will be critical to its implementation. The action days will kick off with a dedicated youth-led afternoon, followed by a Saturday program, which will focus on three priority themes. And Divya, you spoke of the digital and technology. That's going to be one of the three major pillars of this. Peace and security, like who can argue with that? And sustainable development and financing, which is not so easy maybe to understand, but really an important one. In addition to those three themes, there will be a dedicated focus throughout the day on future generations. So confirmed participants really are the heads of state and government ministers, senior UN officials, including the Secretary General, Nobel laureates, and representatives from the private sector and civil society and other actors. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there and kind of broaden the perspective. There are other UN events, UN conventions, certainly the CEDAW review, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, happening in Geneva next week. And I've been key in ensuring that Indigenous women from Winnipeg and Manitoba will be at that table to talk about the horrific incident that has happened here and the effect of violence. So, yeah, keep your eyes and ears perked up and join in.
Yeah, I think it was really important also that you brought up the critical issue that continues to face women and like the barriers that women face in leadership and being in positions of power and being able to make decisions. I think it's obviously very essential to address this gap to create like inclusive and equitable systems. And on that note, I will just pass over the question to Divya.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sakshi. And once again, Mary, like I couldn't have said it better. I just want to start off with where you started off, where are women? And when we look at the CSW specifically from last year, it's the Commission on the Status of Women. And when we think about the opening plenary, which of course happens on the first day, it's the big remarks. And this really struck me once, it was noted down. It wasn't the first speaker, the second speaker, the third speaker, or the fourth speaker that was woman. It was the fifth speaker who is a woman who spoke at the opening plenary. And that is just mind-boggling. When you think about what CSW really stands for and what a lot of these conventions stand for, who is it that's really leading it, and who is it that's intentionally opening things up and really contributing to the bigger picture. So even we're in 2023. 2023 was last year when this, or 2024, the CSW took place earlier this year in 2024, and to this day it wasn't a female that opened up a convention that was on the status of women, and that is absolutely mind-boggling. And I think when you think about other conventions and other things that whether pertaining to women or not, think about how many times it's women that are leading that. So I think I want to give everyone an opportunity to reflect on that. And then just sort of the piece about um how can we contribute to limiting some of these barriers to women's participation as well as younger women's participations. Of course, it's I think it's critical to recognize that um there is an opportunity to contribute in a meaningful way, and it's just about finding that space sometimes. And once again, it really comes down to lifting each other up in a meaningful way, in a way that you can contribute, that affects that policy side of things. So I think those are my two sort of big pieces. I also obviously want to acknowledge sort of the financing piece in all of this, in terms of when you go to the actual event, how do you get there? Um, who's who's making sure that you're able to participate fully? Are you who are you representing? And once again, that intersectionality side of things. When you think about folks who represent certain groups, even in Canada, we are such a diverse country. And then when we think about specifically that Indigenous lens and Indigenous side of things, I know I can't speak to that because I'm not Indigenous myself, but um, even within that Indigenous identity, there's certain groups, whether that's the Inuit or the Métis. Even in Manitoba specifically, we have over 6 or 8 different languages that are represented specifically by Indigenous folks, and then there's different territories and all these different things, and those experiences are so different. And of course, my experience from someone who lives in rural Manitoba or a rural or remote community are so different. So when you think about the different experiences and how they contribute to specifically that policy side of things and how they're so relevant, I think you have to recognize that intersectionality once again. And at the end of the day, how do we contribute in a meaningful way on that international stage in a way where all voices are recognized?
Yeah, I think you brought up a very important point, that it's powerful to ensure that women are not just participants, but also leaders in, critical spaces such as CSW. So moving on to the next question. We would love to hear your thoughts on the role of civil society organizations and not-for-profit organizations in implementing the Beijing Platform for Action. Divya, could you share from your perspective of a youth involved in CSOs? And then we'll hand it over to Mary to get her perspective as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one thing I do want to certainly start off by is by saying that when we think about how us as CSOs can contribute in any meaningful way, one of the conversations that was brought up at CSW specifically last year was um, why do we have to meet in New York? There are so many barriers to actually going to New York. And then on top of that, who actually gets to go there? You have to go through such an extensive sort of process. And then what organizations are represented? Are there organizations that, need to be there that aren't able to find the finances or, just the room to get there? So I think I want to start by recognizing that. And then on top of that, it's often young people oftentimes see those barriers, and those barriers are very real. Um, and then I want to go into sort of how young people, I believe, can contribute in a meaningful way. So I was very privileged to be able to have the opportunity to go last year. And I know there were so many people who had applied, and I know their perspectives would have been just as meaningful as mine. So when we think about young people sort of getting involved with CSO specifically, I have this quote that usually clicks it usually clicks up a light bulb in people's heads, and the quote is that if there isn't a seat for you at the table, bring a folding chair. Create that space for yourself. And I think that's really, really critical in scenarios like this where once again, young people are often considered for that policy change side of things where, we don't have all the relevant experience, knowledge, and all these different things. But when you think about who's really going to be living in this world that once the current policy change makers are gone, it's us. And I think I think young people are hungry. We want to be at the table. We want to contribute to these conversations. And I think when you think about that in a CSO perspective, I encourage all young people to try to get involved as much as possible with boards, different organizations, whether that's through committees or even if you're in school, try getting involved with your student union or a club or something where you can once again contribute and really meaningfully engage in dialogue. And then in respect to CSOs contributing to that implementation side of things of the Beijing Declaration, I think it's important to recognize that unless and until people see you as being a part of that organization in a meaningful way, sometimes you just won't get your voice heard. And I think the more we take up that space, the more we sit on those board tables, the more your ideas and your contributions will be recognized in a way that translates to policy and then further on action. Unfortunately, I know this is a very bureaucratic world, and sometimes, the answer isn't what we want to hear. But in my experience, this has worked in a really meaningful way. And I believe that was one of the biggest reasons why I was able to attend CSW last year. Because I have the privilege of being on the Manitoba Council for International Cooperations Board, and I had the privilege of representing the Manitoba side of things last year. So that's just from my own personal experience. And yeah.
Yeah, I think you highlighted a very critical aspect of us as youth, breaking down barriers and obviously creating spaces for ourselves on the table where there are none. And so on that note, I will pass it over to Mary.
Yeah, I really feel that energy, Divya, and that was really appropriate. I guess, remembering Beijing, it was not a world conference about women, but a women's conference about the world. Think of it that way. A women's conference about the world. And certainly using every opportunity to raise awareness of the fact that Canada signed on to the Platform for Action and the Beijing Declaration. I'm just kind of speaking about the role of CSOs and nonprofit organizations in the implementation. So I think the perspective, getting to the table, getting to that decision-making table, it's a challenge. It is a challenge. But I do think that having participated and feeling that energy and support and knowing that the path is not going to be a straight one, and it does take many of us to work together to kind of manage the system or manage the protocols and what we want and how to get there are two different things. And I think having been part of some of these CSW meetings now and working together with other groups to because it's the countries that make the decision. So you can't just say amongst the NGOs, okay, this is what we want to see. You've got to influence the diplomats that are in fact meeting and drafting and putting the pressure on them to come up with the language that we want. The structure of the Beijing was much as we see today, with NGOs having the opportunity to come together. So that's good in finding out what other countries are, how they're working on whatever the women's leadership. When you look at the countries that are going to be coming to the CSW, knowing how and the challenges that they face. I don't know if there'll be anybody from Afghanistan, for example. If there will be women that aren't living in Afghanistan, but do have access to the information of the lives there. So it is, I have certainly learned a great deal. And I just wanted to also add, and maybe I'll say it a little bit later, what I found so useful when I got into that situation of working with diplomats, working with others that were working on putting pressure on language to be included in documents, or even educating others about what the situation might be. You could volunteer. You could, for example, in Beijing in '95. Was just the beginning of having computers and email, just the very beginning. And I was fortunate. I had some of that skills basically because of the job that I had. And they had huge servers. And so I volunteered and I went there for a couple hours every day and would help women coming from these countries that wanted to send messages back to their families. And just in talking to them, finding out personally, what their situation was and how they were there, and volunteering. And the whole time of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, the inquiry, which was held here in Winnipeg, and they were here for quite a few days. And so I went and helped the women in recording some of the information they would be meeting, and I'd say, okay, I'll just go and take the notes so that you can have the talking and making some recommendations about how to move forward. So you can have the leaders, you can support them, but sometimes just saying, listen, can I help you? And you'll make a contact with someone who's looking for a room at the UN, because believe me, it can be a challenge, or finding, where a certain meeting that they want to attend. Well, okay, can I help you? So it's, and with the energy and education and willingness of so many of you, that volunteer aspect can make, it certainly helped me. I know it helped me in the beginning.
Thank you, Mary, for highlighting the critical role that CSOs play, and especially the role that they play in providing individuals from all over the world the access to a platform such as CSW. Now we're going to move on to the fourth question of today's session, and let's talk about youth engagement. What are the ways in which young people can contribute to the BPfA, and what challenges do they face in doing so? Divya, do you mind kicking us off on some of your thoughts on youth representation and your experiences? And then after that, we can hear from Mary.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Sakshi, once again. So like I said, I think what I said in my earlier response, where I firmly believe young people need to get more involved with boards, and us as organizations, folks in the room who are part of organizations need to support in creating space for young people. Oftentimes we'll see that there's that tokenism side of things where, it's, there will be people who say, oh, I have a youth council, or oh, we have like a youth perspective or a youth committee. But why is it that young people aren't invited to be a part of the board? Why is it that there's always a wing where, they're supposed to just be together and not be a part of the actual big table where some of these bigger discussions take place? And I think once you do create that, like that youth committee, or it sometimes lumps youth voices together, where I firmly believe that youth experiences are so diverse, and young women's experiences are so diverse, that there needs to be that ability to have that broader conversation. So once again, I just want to loop that back in. And then speaking about specifically a young woman's perspective, just from my own sort of experience, I've often been on boards where I'm usually the only younger person, but then I'm also the only woman, that, and then on top of that, being a woman of color and all these different things. So um that sometimes can be definitely a newer experience. It can be a very intimidating one. I know when I started my journey being a part of the different committees and boards that I sit on, it was challenging sometimes to put yourself out there, and recognizing that my voice matters just as much as someone else's, no matter what my age or experience was. um and oftentimes I think it's important to recognize our lived experiences as well in all of this, as young people, and how those really contribute to, once again, that policy change making side of things. So I think there's a lot of power in that, and I think young people need to realize that, and really have that ability to contribute, once again, in that meaningful way side of things. And then specifically, how can we address these sort of challenges as a society, is once again creating that space, uplifting others. And then specifically within young people, I think sometimes there's that idea of competition. Like there's there's that scarcity mindset where we're thinking, oh, there's such limited space for one person, and how do I get there? So I think, and that's not to fault young people at all. I think it's oftentimes the fault of the system, where once again, there isn't enough space that's created for young people, so we have to create that for ourselves. And one thing I did find specifically unique at CSW, and I think I've seen this in a lot of other higher level events, and specific government events, where there's gonna be like a person that's talking to you, that's a high, like an official, and sometimes they'll sort of be talking to you, and then they'll look past you to see, is there someone else that I can talk to that's equally of importance? Or even for some young people, if you're exchanging ideas with other young people, we of course want to contribute to that policy and change side of things. So we'll be instead of looking for other folks to talk to. And I think it's important to recognize that young people do offer critical perspectives, and I think sometimes those are really undervalued in spaces like these. And even little conscious actions like that, where you want to talk to someone who's higher up, is not, I don't think that's that's how we should operate and how we should work. I think it's important to exchange ideas, for young people to exchange ideas, but also for folks in those positions of power to listen, and listen in a way that's intentional, and not demeaning by any means. So those are just a couple of thoughts I had.
After listening to that, I'm sure many young people that are listening can resonate with a lot of the challenges that you spoke about, especially the intersectional identity of like being a woman and then also like a woman of color. I think that's also a very important aspect to bring up. I would just like to hand this question over to Mary.
Yeah, I don't know if I can add much except my own personal experiences. The other thing that I found in participating at the conferences and accessing those with some power and influence in the delegation, because as I say, it is the countries that make the decisions about what goes into the documents, and it's not up to the NGO community, but the NGO community can push those diplomats and those that are making the decision. And one of the ways that I found kind of representing yourself is like I had a brooch that an Indigenous woman had made for our delegation, the last one that I was at. And so people would say, "Oh, that's what is that?" And then I would, have a conversation. Oh, yeah, this was made by an Indigenous woman from Manitoba, Treaty One. Like I get into the conversation and kind of use that. And I know other times when I've been there representing whatever organization, make sure that you have some way, like the Ontario Council, I don't know, some way of presenting yourself and how you can do that visually. I also brought, and I had Indigenous friends that made it, the beaded red dress and beaded orange shirt. And I gave that to, some of the presenters. I actually gave it to the woman from the United States, the ambassador to the UN, and gave her a red dress, beaded red dress from Manitoba, and had the person who was supporting her chief of staff, but kind of talking to her about the issues for Indigenous women in Manitoba. So, you have something that is kind of meaningful. And Divya gave me these beautiful beads that, it sounds kind of, I don't know, it may not even speak to what you think might be appropriate, but it does make a difference. And, you give that to, there was a woman who was there from the Ukraine. And I mean, a media person, and she had a horrendous story to tell. And then afterwards, I gave her one of the beaded orange shirts and shirts for the missing children, the children that didn't come home, and told her the story of residential schools. So, it was just a way of connecting, informing, and educating others, because society as a whole also has to become more aware, focused on what are the issues, and more determined and educated. So I just wanted to share. And the other good thing, and I don't know, Divya, if you had a chance to meet him, but Bob Ray is now, for the next year, I believe the appointment is a year. He's the president of ECOSOC. Bob Ray from Canada is the president of ECOSOC. So, I bet the youth could get a meeting with him, and whatever the process would be. But I'm sure he'd be happy to hear from organized group. Okay, they're from Canada. We want to talk to you, and so kind of keep your antenna out there. Okay, who could. And obviously you've done your homework and you know the language you want to see, yeah, and what Canada could be doing better. And so I'm just giving you some suggestions based on my experience.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Mary, for those suggestions. I'm sure a lot of us here will find those very helpful. And now for our final question before we open it up to the floor. How can we bring back learnings from the Commission on the Status of Women commemoration of 30 years of BPfA to the community? And why is there a need to do so? Divya, could you start us off by highlighting your personal experiences? And then Mary, we would love to hear from you as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much once again. And I think I do just want to quickly circle back to the last question. I want to also just kind of recognize the importance of mentorship in all of this. And I want to say a huge thank you to Mary. And I think one of the biggest reasons why I'm here today, and I think one of the biggest ways that I've been able to contribute to some of these discussions and policies is because of having a person like Mary in my life, who once again presents these opportunities. And I think mentorship can go both ways. Like, I get to learn so much from her, and I know that when we have our lunches, I love telling Mary about what's going on in my own life, and she gives me a lot of advice, and it goes vice versa. So it really comes down to, once again, what Mary said, that networking, relationship building. And I think it goes more to that relationship building, and how do you meaningfully create those that can be a mutual benefit for both, and all women to go truly. So I think that's what it really comes down to. And when you come back to those learnings, I think that's what I learned at CSW, the importance of building that community, building those relationships. And I'll give you an example. So at CSW, I met someone, Senator Mary Lou McFedrin, who is an incredible champion of women's rights, youth rights in her own way. And I know she's advocating for a lot of policies within a Senate that specifically are more youth focused, which I personally really appreciate. But once I came back, we've had several discussions. Once again, similar to Mary, she's been, someone who I can talk to, bounce ideas off of. And I had the privilege of being now on her youth council. So once again, in that way, I can meaningfully contribute to policy. So that would be one of the learnings, and why it's important to bring these back is so that we can once again influence policy change specifically within our own vicinities. Um, and how do we do that? Social media, young people are excellent at that. Social media is something that I know we all use, and it can go either way. Sometimes we can use social media just for leisure purposes, but when you think about using social media in a more meaningful way, how do we spread information? How do we use it? How do we spread it fast? And I think in this way, I was able to share with my university community, with the different boards and councils that I was on, through that, documentation side of things, um, real life, what is happening, what am I doing, and what's the UN like. Secondly, forums like this where, folks are here who want to be a part of this conversation, want to learn from the experiences of folks who've attended some of these forums. And I think this is an excellent way of that sharing, asking questions, community building, and all these different things. So those would be my comments on that.
Thank you, Divya. Yeah, I think it's really incredible how social media can extend like the impact of such global conversations. Mary, could you now share your thoughts on how we can bring learnings back?
Well, the social media is definitely, something that the youth is great, and sharing information quickly and in a way that really captures interest. But I also think, setting up a meeting when you get back, especially if there's, not just one person, but, a couple of people, two people, or even a small delegation with your local MP, MPP, whatever, mayor, and kind of, okay, they might be interested with what happened, what's happening globally, the learnings that you had, what like some provinces are setting up kind of youth advisory groups, presenting to the other youth, and sort of, okay, these are the important issues globally. So really coming back with, whatever the presentation. I know Amy and I kind of talked about when we talked to the UNAC, the United Nations Association in Canada here, and Divya was there, I think. And it was really great to kind of have that opportunity to present through UNAC, the United Nations Association, who would have some background, but to share with others that would probably be supportive. Obviously they'd be interested, and so those opportunities can make a difference. I know when I came back, somebody said, okay, come and speak at my school, the junior high kids, and so I've done that. You kind of, people think, oh my gosh, they were at the UN, that might be a good speaker for people are sometimes looking for speakers, eh? So, and you can share to get the word out, because it doesn't happen that everybody gets that opportunity to be involved or to have that background, all that information, and you can access that information once you've got the background that you have, and you're there. You'll be able to, with your social contacts, social media contacts, and sharing it more broadly in your community and network. It's very helpful.
Thank you so much, Mary, for sharing your valuable insights on engaging with MPs or MPPs and local communities. I think that's probably a very helpful way to take global experiences and translate them into local action. That concludes our session, our prepared question session. But now I'd like to open the floor to our participants. So you can either raise your hand or unmute yourself to ask a question, or you can also feel free to drop your question in the chat, and I will direct it to our speakers. Feel free to take your time if you're still formulating your thoughts. I think it's a very great opportunity to ask anything that's on your mind about the Beijing platform or the role of CSOs in youth and policy development. Okay, there we go. We have a question from Mia. Mia, go ahead.
Are you guys able to see and hear me okay? Hi, Divya. Hi, Mary. Thank you so much for everything that you guys shared today. I have a question for both of you, if you guys both want to kind of weigh in. So for a lot of us here, I'd say most of us, we're all very interested in advocacy and human rights and gender equality and how we can make a difference, a positive impact in the world. Of course, as I'm sure both of you know, there are a lot of times when advocates are going to be faced with doubts from others, and this is the way things are. You can't change the world. You can't save the world. And it's really discouraging sometimes to hear that and to say, this is an impossible task. You can't do it. So I guess my question is, what do you guys advise to youth advocates like ourselves who are still kind of new to these naysayers and to the doubts? How do we keep ourselves from internalizing these and keep fighting the good fight?
I can go first for this, Mary.
I was just going to say, Divya, you go first.
Sounds good. So this is one of my favorite quotes by far, and I know this is gonna sound really cheesy and cliche, but I really like it. And it's essentially it says, "Don't tell me that the sky is the limit when there's footsteps on the moon." So we've seen, really big things happen, and unless someone takes that first step, people are of course gonna keep doubting things. And you need to be the change that you want to see in the world. There's so many people who, and especially my role, being a young leader, there's so many people who come with problems on top of problems, and I think that's really really important, and I think it's really really critical. But who's doing the important work to come up with a solution? And it's oftentimes the youth advocates who put in tireless, thankless, all that hard work into it. And when people, come and put their negativity on you and say, "Oh, that's not possible," or like, "Oh, you can't change the world," don't listen to that. Like, this is oftentimes criticism that isn't contextualized, and people just, oftentimes, and when people say these things, it's often a reflection of themselves, not you, because oftentimes people are unsuccessful in what they want to do and all these different things, and they just want to put that out into the world, and that's not for you to take. What's important for you, what's important for a young person or a young advocate or an advocate in general, is to put that behind and move forward, because you're doing it for the betterment of society. You're looking at it beyond yourself, and this person, whoever it might be, who's telling you it's impossible, they're seeing it from that scarcity mindset. Once again, it's important to be optimistic, because hope is such an important mechanism, and I think advocates see that. But sometimes people who are naysayers, or put that negativity on you, don't see that. So recognize that, acknowledge it, and be like, "Thank you for what you said," but move on. It's not worth your time.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think it is challenging. You have to be honest. We have to be honest. The challenges facing the world, uh, facing human society, are pretty strong and pretty. They really are. So I think it's one step at a time, and it's the people around you. It's younger people, kids that are in school, the resources to support them and their education, so that they are aware what you can do in your community to support women who are trying to make a difference. Um, and and support their voices. At the time of election, go to whoever is running and ask some pretty, strong questions. What are they going to do about whatever it is, whether it's something to do with the environment or um, access to books? My gosh, what's happening in Ontario? So, there are these issues, and I think youth are have to and must pick up this torch. But I also shared with you, at the very beginning, how women came together, small in numbers, and they wouldn't take, men as the all-inclusive word. It was human rights, not men's rights. So, those women did come together, and have been doing this forever, trying to influence and make a difference. I know when I was in Beijing, they were negotiating some peace settlements in some of the countries in Africa, and the UN would give some money for turning in arms, like turning in their guns and their ammunition or whatever. And so they would give the money, and if they gave the money to the men were spending it on motorcycles and trucks, and but then they changed. They said, no, we're going to give it to the families. We're going to give it to the women. Women right away were putting it in, for health and for education and clothes for their kids. I mean, it was just, and they shared these stories, but the UN or the department that was doing this and administering the funding pretty soon changed their mind because the men were, they'd turn in their guns and expect to get a motorcycle. So no, so it's kind of interesting, but I mean, this was many years ago. I don't know how it's negotiating peace right now is a very tough subject, very tough subject. But anyway, I just wanted to share that story.
Thank you so much for the question, Mia, and to our speakers today, Divya and Mary, for answering that so well. Does anyone have any other questions?
Yes. So my question is, if we look at the gender-based violence issues and in the developing countries, where the women are still not financially independent and they are not that much educated and they don't have the skills. So what are the most effective strategies for empowering women with the skills and resources they need to prevent and overcome gender-based violence, and how can these initiatives be scaled to reach vulnerable communities specifically?
Want me to come up with a few thoughts, Divya? Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure I understand your question, but as I kind of detect, it's how can women who are not necessarily oppressed, but don't have the opportunities, don't have the maybe skills, education, access to make and to kind of have their thoughts related to influencing something like this Commission on the Status of Women. I think women have always gathered, whether it's around cooking, whether it's around cleaning, whether it's around kids, and the work of some of our international organizations are, I think making a serious attempt to fund women-run organizations now internationally, globally. And I think that's a good thing. But it is difficult for women who do not necessarily have the access to education or opportunities, but can maybe express themselves in other ways. I think arts, I think writing, I think creating something that tells the story of their life can really make can also make an effort in educating others. Oh, here's a question that just came up. Like, do you see any notable changes? All right, I think you've all seen it. Do you want me to just proceed on this question?
Yeah, I'm just going to read it out just so in case.
Sure. Okay, that's a good idea.
So the question is for Mary, and it says, reflecting on the progress made since the 1995 Beijing conference, do you see any notable changes in attitudes? And from the example you just gave about men, what do you believe still needs to be addressed to foster a more equitable perspective?
I love that question, Favor Francis. I think it's yeah, like it's attitudes, eh? Like attitudes, and that's that's something that it's hard to change. Like I sometimes you just kind of have to move on and say, okay, we're going to deal with the younger generation and ensure that they don't have that attitude. But I think the influence, if it's talking about, say, a male population, I think if you can access and influence somebody like Bob Ray, another man who maybe has a more open mind about things. Yeah, but but I think changing the attitude of men is a difficult one. It is a challenging one. I think that we have made some progress in that, but I think the military solutions that men are finding now and using, it's really scary. And I think to have all of us, just say no, enough is enough. I don't know how that is going to happen. Maybe this Pact for the Future, pushed by some of the strong youth that are there and are influencing the way forward. But that's a serious question. Yeah, it's a good question, because I think women in many countries really are silenced, particularly they call it gender apartheid. And I think that is happening. And so how you can begin to change that when what we see in the hands of military are the destruction of the world. So changing attitudes I think it's got to start with the young and influencing our education system and ensuring that the books and the voting. I know you mentioned, Divya mentioned Mary Lou McPhedran, and she's pushing through. I'm not sure where it's at right now. I think it's still in the Senate that she wants to ensure the voting age now be reduced to 16, so that younger members can now have a vote. And it's true. It is happening in some countries. So it's going to be one small step, and yeah, working together.
Thank you.
But yeah.
I think the last question for today, as it seems like we are just right on time, I will give this to Divya. It is a question from Jam, and it says, I think organic conversations go a long way in pushing for our advocacies, especially those that we make outside of our echo chambers. Most of the time, it's difficult to start these conversations. What advice can you give to advocates such as ourselves in starting that conversation with people, not necessarily naysayers outside of our circles?
Yeah, awesome. This is such a wonderful question. I think when I started my own journey, I faced this as well, faced difficulties with this as well. And I think it's sometimes about going into spaces where you typically wouldn't find young people. So that means going to, I know that there's usually like Chamber of Commerce events, where young people typically aren't present because it's for business leaders. But once again, just going out to some of these places where, that you would consider outside of your circles, going to networking events, finding areas and spaces that would expand your network, and where you can once again connect, make sure that you are able to find those opportunities within those crowds, because oftentimes once again, because oftentimes young people aren't necessarily at these tables, people are unaware of the expertise that youth can bring. So when you go to these spaces, when you go to these networking events, when you go to policy forums and so on and so forth, it oftentimes once again presents as that light bulb moment in people's heads, where they now would understand that young people can contribute to these conversations. They oftentimes have very great ideas about what changes need to be implemented. How, once again, it really comes down to influencing that policy side of things. So I would say intentionally step outside of your circles, try to tell folks about some of your background work, and you'll find that oftentimes people outside of your circles are actually interested in the work that you're doing, and you will find someone like I found Mary, who are willing to listen and are willing to help you grow in ways you couldn't think.
Thank you. I think we have two more questions. If either of the speakers want to address it just really quickly in like a minute, that would be perfect. So the first question is, the Beijing Platform for Action provides global framework for gender equality. How can it be adapted to avoid a one-size-fits-all approach in developing countries? So either Mary or Divya wants to take the question on.
Yeah, how can it be adapted? The Beijing Platform for Action talks about the critical areas of concern, and it outlines, and this is why statistics and data is so important. If you look at the data by country, and there's an amazing amount of information out there that is collected, and Canada does not a bad job on having the data. But if the data is not there, it's difficult. But if you're looking at a country that doesn't, the information isn't there that shows that women are poorer, women's health is, the women are dying younger, whatever, I think that's when you really do need to have the data that can come forward that demonstrates that women, the girl child, and I'm talking about women and all their diversity, and then breaking the definition of women down into other groups. Yeah, I think that's the way, is to show by information, by data, collected census, and there is a lot of information that is obtainable, and there are reports that come out on a regular basis that demonstrate, the access to education, child marriage, huge, kids are getting married, because of poverty. And so the girl child is, is no longer a part of the family, they're sold. And there's information on that. Now, this is, so go to the data that supports an argument that would maybe be beneficial to women and girls.
Thank you very much for answering that question, Mary. And then the last question that we have in the chat is from Megan. And it says, regarding the inclusion of countries with systemic gender inequality and practices that oppress women in BPfA and the CSW, how can such frameworks ensure accountability and meaningful participation in advancing gender equality globally? So either of the speakers want to take on the question.
You go for it, Divya.
Yeah, I think this is a huge question to tackle, but when I think about accountability, I think about, once again, just that policy side of things and how those policies actually translate into action. I mean, you can put down a million words on a paper and they could mean nothing if nothing actually happens in the real world. I think one of the things that I found at CSW that was really interesting was it was that all girls should receive education, and that was something that was discussed on a really large in a really large forum with the Secretary General present. I mean, we're living in 2024. I think, it's been so many years since we've talked about women having access to equal gender, like equal education. It shouldn't take multiple forms to address a basic concept like not even all younger, or not even all girls and women should have access to education. Should be everyone should have access to education, period. But once again, when you think about what we're discussing in 2024, this should not be an issue. So is the accountability really there if we're talking about the same concepts we were 20, 30 years ago? I don't think so. But that's why we need advocates like the folks who are present at tables today to really push forward critical issues like this, and really making sure that we're identifying issues that are present, and things once again, things like gender mutilation, when we think about the uprise of right-wing movements in the world that we're presently living in, I think it's more than necessary and critical to hold governments accountable, and sometimes even ourselves accountable, because once again, if we don't do the hard work, no one else is. The naysayers, that's what the naysayers want. That's what the people who tell you it's impossible want, for you to stay quiet, not do anything about it. But I think that's where the role of youth advocates is so critical, to really get out there, continue pushing, like Mary said, meet with your local MP, share things on social media, attend policy forums, get out of your, once again, that question that was posed, get out of your echo chambers, go in places where young people aren't supposed to be, or you aren't supposed to be as a young woman, and do what is right, which is advocate for yourself and create that space.
Thank you so much for that, Divya. I just wanted to say thank you all for your thoughtful questions, and a huge thank you to our speakers today, Divya and Mary, for sharing their wonderful insights with us. I'm sure a lot of us learned a lot. I'm now going to pass it over to Karen for closing remarks.
Thanks, Sakshi. I'm Karen. I'm a policy professional in the banking sector, and I'm also a member of the YPH. I just wanted to say thank you so much, Mary and Divya, for your insight and expertise. It's been such an honor and pleasure to learn from you. I will, and I'm sure our participants will continue to reflect on today's discussion. I'd also like to thank the YPH members, Yara, Aisha, Christine, Mia, Sakshi, and the OCIC team for all their efforts in making today such a success. With this, we close out today's session and invite you to our upcoming Policy Matters sessions in November 2024 and January 2025. More details about these dates and timings of the session will be available closer to the session on our website and on social media. You can also sign up for our newsletter through our website and to receive information through our monthly newsletters. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you have a great evening, and we look forward to seeing you guys all again.